I guess my first experiences came because I was involved in the John Flynn program, and for those of you that don't know, it's a program that the government run to try and get medical students out working in rural and remote areas of Australia. So for 2 weeks of each year while I was studying, I would go up to a little town called Walgett, which is about 4 hours north of Dubbo, so really in the middle of nowhere, but I was based in the Aboriginal Medical Service there. And it was through that experience at the Walgett AMS that I was really first exposed to Aboriginal health, and I became really interested in the area. So in my final year of study, I did my 6-week elective at Alice Springs Hospital, and I was in the paediatrics department there. So I also worked mostly with Aboriginal patients in Alice Springs. Okay. I think from my experiences on placement in both Walgett and Alice Springs, what I really came to realise is that health is not a single entity. There's so many factors that affect someone's health. There's cultural factors, there's financial and economic factors, social factors, educational factors, and I think with Aboriginal people, their history is so complex. There's been this long history of dispossession and I guess loss of identity through the stolen generations, and I think that has a big impact still today because there's whole generations of people who were moved away from their land, and their as a result their children and their grandchildren really didn't grow up knowing who they were and what their purpose was in life, and I think that has a really profound effect on people's health. I think probably what really struck me in Aboriginal communities was the strong sense of family. They really stick together and their family is very important to them. So I think that's a strength because there's a lot of support within the family unit, and families, I guess the concept of family extends maybe beyond what the traditional, I guess, white Australian concept of family would be. So you know, when I was in Walgett, it seemed sometimes like everyone was related. You know, I'd be going down the street with one of my colleagues who was Aboriginal, and every second person was, oh, g'day cuz, hi auntie. And so I think that's a really a strength in terms of if you can harness that, a family will really support another family member. I think too that there's the resounding kind of strength is that Aboriginal people in Australia today are survivors. They've really lived through some exceptionally traumatic events over the course of white man's history in Australia. They've actually, you know, got a lot of resilience despite the odds, and I think that's definitely a strength. So I guess in public health we use this concept of upstream and downstream to have a look at what factors affect a person's health. So if you think of upstream, they're things like the community that people grow up in, their education, the home that they live in, their experiences in early childhood, the food that they eat, the activities that they undertake, their education. All of those factors really have a profound effect on that person in the long term or downstream. When I was up in Alice Springs and I was doing paediatrics, and we were seeing a young 12-year-old girl who'd just been diagnosed with type 2 diabetes. So she was only 12, but she already weighed over 100 kilos and obviously was at high risk of developing type 2 diabetes. So this young girl, she lived in a community probably less than an hour out of Alice Springs. Her mum, who was in her 30s, had type 2 diabetes and was already experiencing some of the consequences of that. So she had diabetic retinopathy, she had a degree of kidney failure as well. So it was pretty shocking to see this, you know, this 12-year-old injecting herself with insulin already. And I sort of, you know, thought, well, I guess my frustration was that this was completely preventable. But, you know, when you go back to look at some of these remote communities, and it's not just in remote communities that this happens, I should add, but, you know, fresh fruit and vegetables are very expensive Often, you know, if you've got a large family and a limited income, you tend to buy the food that's going to fill everyone up, and you don't necessarily worry about the nutritional value of that food. So that family predominantly had a diet of highly processed foods. So that was a big problem. When you look at her ability to exercise, you know, there wasn't the facilities available for young people. You know, there wasn't a pool to go swimming. There wasn't, you know, it's really hot, so, you know, it's not like you go out for a run. And basically the kids were bored. There wasn't activities like after school sports for them to participate in. So I guess it was difficult to get these children physically active. It's not about treating people differently, but it's about treating people holistically, and I think a good doctor should do that with any patient. And just being aware that people always have multiple things happening in their lives that have led them to come and see you today. So you need to be sort of thinking about those in the back of your head while you're interacting with them.